Hi everyone, my name's Tom and I'm going to be talking you through Unit 2S, which is the making of modern Britain 1951 to 2007. And this PowerPoint will do two things. It will tell you about some of the main content that you'll be covering if you choose this unit, and it will also tell you about some of the key exam skills that you'll need for success on Unit 2 as well. First of all, then the content. In your first year, you'll cover 1951 through to 1979. In 1951, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister for the second time. You'll know, I'm sure, that he was Prime Minister during the Second World War, but in 1945 he'd lost power to Clement Attlee's Labour government. But Churchill comes back in 1951, and we then have 13 years of Conservative government, not only under Churchill, but later under Eden, Macmillan and Douglas Hume. And we look at their economic and their social policies, more on that in a moment. We also look a little bit at the role they played as the situation worsened in Northern Ireland as well. After 1964, we have a period where Labour and the Conservatives came in and out of power. In 1964, Harold Wilson became the Labour Prime Minister. He was defeated in 1970 by Ted Heath, the Conservative, but the last part of the 1970s, Wilson came back and was followed by another Labour Prime Minister, Jim Callaghan. When we look at those governments, we look in particular at their economic policies. And this was a period between 1951 and 79 of what we call consensus, where the main political parties agreed on quite a big chunk of economic policy, in particular the involvement of trade unions in decision making, the encouragement of the welfare state, and a mixture of nationalised and privatised industries as well, what we call the mixed economy. We look as well at the fact that this, for a lot of people, was a time of boom, a time of affluence. For the first time for many people's lives, they were able to enjoy a summer holiday. They were able to own a car for the first time as well. And we look at what that meant for society. In terms of social policy as well, we look at some of the liberal reforms of the 1960s, for example, the abolition of the death penalty, the legalisation of abortion, the reform of the divorce laws as well. And alongside that, we look at the rise of youth culture, the word teenager being used for the first time, the impact of immigration, and also the role of women, particularly as we move through the 60s and the 70s as well. And a final part of the first year content is looking at foreign relations. This was a time when the British Empire, which had been so strong in the 19th century, was coming to an end. It was crumbling. At the same time, Britain was looking towards Europe, and this was the moment in 1973 where Britain joined the EEC, the organisation that eventually became the EU. The backdrop to this whole period as well was the Cold War, which some of you may have studied at GCSE, and we look a little bit at British government's role during the Cold War too. Moving into the second year, we begin in 1979, and 1979 was the year that the post-war consensus was shattered with the election of Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government. And Thatcher dominates 1979 through to 1990. She's followed by another Conservative, John Major, until 1997. And then we get Tony Blair, the first Labour Prime Minister since 79. And Tony Blair has done a huge amount in changing the Labour Party and speaks of New Labour. So this is a period where for the first half the Conservative Party was dominant, but then for the second half Tony Blair's New Labour Party was very, very powerful. And we look at how that happened. Why was it the Conservatives declined? Why was it that the Labour Party became much more appealing to a lot of voters? A big part of looking at Margaret Thatcher is her economic policies. We look, for instance, at privatisation and how her economic policies were very different from what had gone before in the consensus. Like the early part of the first year content, we look as well at society, a few standout events, the miners' strike, the poll tax, but we look again at issues around immigration and race, how much Britain had become a multicultural society, and again we have a look at the role of women. In terms of foreign affairs, there's quite a lot to look at. Britain get involved in several wars abroad, for instance in the Falklands, in Kosovo, in Afghanistan and Iraq. And finally we look at the role that Britain, and particularly Margaret Thatcher, played in the end of the Cold War as well. In terms of assessment, you'll only do one exam for AQA on this unit, and that will be at the end of your second year. That exam lasts 2.5 hours and is worth 80 marks. In the exam, there's one compulsory primary source question, which covers 3 sources. We'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. You'll also have to do 2 knowledge essays, and you choose those 2 from a choice of 3. The source question, as I said, is based on primary sources, sources written by people from the time, people who were involved in the events that they're writing or speaking about. The source question is worth 30 marks, and we always advise you to spend about an hour on that. All 3 sources are on the same topic. You won't get 3 sources from very different parts of the unit. And the key word in this question is value. And by value, we mean how much insight does a source give us into a particular topic. For example, the impact of Margaret Thatcher. How much light does that source shed on that particular topic? And in order to do that, you'll think about the provenance of the source, in other words, who wrote it, the type of source it is, when it was written, and why it was written as well, and who it was written for, who are the audience. You look at the tone or the mood of the source too. Does that mood, does that tone reflect the kind of mood of a lot of people at the time, or is it unique to that source? And you'll also look at the content. Is the argument and the content of that source representative of what other people would have thought at the time, or is it very specific to a particular group? And in order to do all of that, of course, your own knowledge and everything you've built up over the previous 2 years will be really important for that too. In terms of the knowledge essays, both essays that you choose are worth 25 marks, and we'd advise you to spend about 45 minutes per essay. Some of the skills that you need for this will be quite similar to your GCSE skills, for example, balance and a clear structure, but there are differences as well. We spend a long time teaching you how to write a really good, strong introduction, which sets you up well for a focused and analytical essay. We also spend quite a bit of time making sure your conclusion comes to a really firm judgment. It's crucial that the evidence you use in knowledge essays is precise, that it's detailed, and that you use a good range of relevant and accurate examples as well. That can make a massive difference between the middle and the highest levels. One of the things that we really focus on at A-level is the idea of a sustained argument, an argument that runs right the way from your introduction through to the conclusion as well. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that's given you a little bit of an insight into Unit 2S. It's a really fascinating unit and gives us the background in lots of ways to some of the massive political issues that we see being discussed today. Just a reminder, don't forget to like, to share and to subscribe to Alan, History Nerd, as well. Thank you very much for watching and goodbye.
Huge thank you to Tom for recording that for us. Tom is going to be joining us in September, or rejoining us in September, should I say, and really looking forward to teaching history and politics with us. In particular, that unit there, 2S, looks like a really, really interesting unit, going to tell us an awful lot about modern Britain. So I said thank you to Tom, not Tom above me, Tom you've seen on the video before. Right, lovely. Remember to like, to share, to subscribe. This unit will be running alongside our Russia unit, so check out the videos on that unit as well, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much.